There comes a moment in every life when faith and fear meet face to face. It's not loud. It's not grand. It's a whisper, the kind that visits you at 2 a.m. when the world is silent and your thoughts are not. You wonder if what you've been praying for, dreaming of, hoping against hope could ever become real. And in that quiet wrestling, something shifts. Not because the circumstances have changed, but because you finally dare to believe that maybe the impossible was never impossible, only waiting for you to stop doubting it. We often think that doubt is a sign of weakness, a crack in our belief, a flaw in our faith. But what if doubt isn't the opposite of faith at all? What if it's part of it, the very thing that deepens it? You see, doubt arrives in those quiet moments when our expectations collide with reality, when the story we thought we were living suddenly takes an unexpected turn. It comes to test the foundation of what we claim to believe. It doesn't come to shame us, it comes to stretch us. When you're caught between what you hope for and what you can see, your instinct might be to silence the uncertainty, to suppress it, to pretend that you're fine. But doubt doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It only grows stronger. The truth is, doubt is a teacher. It asks you to slow down and listen. It asks, do you believe only when things are clear? Or can you still believe when everything is uncertain? That question, uncomfortable as it is the birthplace of a deeper kind of trust. Think of the moments in your life when everything felt unstable, when the future looked nothing like what you imagined. You might have wondered, did I miss here? Did I make a mistake? Did I hope for too much? But maybe that's exactly where faith begins. Not in the certainty of the outcome, but in the willingness to keep walking even when you can't see where the road leads. Faith doesn't silence doubt, it walks beside it. It says, I don't know how, but I will still move forward. Doubt, in many ways, is an invitation to intimacy with yourself, with the divine, with the unknown. It strips away the surface answers and forces you to confront the heart of what you truly believe. Because when everything you thought you could rely on falls apart, what remains is not the brittle version of belief that depends on proof, but the resilient one that learns to breathe in mystery. Sometimes we pray for clarity when what we really need is courage. We think we need more assurance, more signs, more confirmation. But clarity doesn't build faith, courage does. And courage grows in the soil of uncertainty. It's there in the trembling and the not knowing that your faith is being forged. So when doubt visits you, don't treat it as a threat. Sit with it. Listen to what it's trying to show you. Let it reveal the parts of you that still cling to control, the corners of your heart that still resist trust. Because the moment you stop seeing doubt as a wall and start seeing it as a doorway, something shifts. You realize it's not here to weaken your faith, but to purify it, to take you beyond the shallow comfort of certainty and into the deeper waters of surrender. And it's there, in that quiet surrender, that the impossible first begins to unfold. We live in a world that teaches us to control everything. Our schedules, our relationships, our image, even our emotions. Control makes us feel safe. It gives us the illusion that if we plan enough, prepare enough, and predict enough, we can prevent pain and guarantee outcomes. But the truth is, control is often the very thing that keeps us from experiencing the beauty that faith wants to give us. Because control is built on fear, and fear suffocates what faith is trying to grow. We say we trust, but we want to know how the story ends. We want God to hand us the full script before we agree to play our part. We want the promise without the process, the arrival without the uncertainty of the journey. But that's not how trust works. Faith doesn't offer you a map, it offers you a compass. It doesn't show you the whole path, it asks you to take the next step. The more we insist on knowing the details, the more we close ourselves off from the wonder of discovery. Sometimes, What you call unanswered prayer is simply the space where control has to die before grace can enter. You've been trying to push doors open, rearrange timelines, fix what was never yours to fix. You think you're being proactive, but what you're really doing is holding on too tightly to what was meant to unfold freely. The divine doesn't move through force, it moves through flow. When you loosen your grip, you make room for what's meant for you to arrive without your manipulation. There's a quiet humility in surrender. It's not giving up, it's giving over. It's saying, I trust that what I can't control might still be working for my good. That's not passivity, that's alignment. The need to control everything is often a symptom of the deeper fear that nothing good will happen unless you make it happen. But what if goodness doesn't need to be chased? What if it's already on its way to you, but it's waiting for you to stop blocking the path? We forget that miracles don't bloom in the soil of anxiety. They grow where there is peace, openness, and trust. The impossible unfolds not when you tighten your fist, but when you finally let go. Because control isn't power, connection is. Control isolates you from possibility, while surrender connects you to it. The moment you release the demand for certainty, you make space for life to surprise you. You don't need to know how it will happen. You just need to know that it will, in its own time, in its own way. When you stop forcing the outcome, you start aligning with the rhythm of grace. And in that surrender, something begins to shift. The weight lifts, the air clears, and suddenly, the impossible feels a little closer. Because what you couldn't control was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be trusted. Trust is not something that simply appears in a moment of inspiration. It's something you cultivate over and over again. We often wait for a feeling of certainty before we act, as if confidence must precede the step. But trust rarely begins with a feeling. It begins with a decision, a quiet, trembling choice that says, I will believe before I see. And that choice is never easy because it asks you to release logic, to lean into what cannot yet be proven. We want to trust only when the odds are in our favor, when the signs are clear, when the path looks predictable. But trust doesn't thrive in the safety of what's known. It grows in the dark, in the uncertain spaces where we can't see the outcome, and yet we move anyway. It's built one act of courage at a time. Through the small moments when we decide to keep showing up, even when it feels pointless. Every time you choose to act on faith instead of fear, trust deepens its roots. There's a kind of intimacy that forms between you and the unknown when you keep showing up like that. It's a conversation that doesn't need words. A knowing that builds through repetition. You learn to lean on something invisible, to find peace in something you can't control. You begin to realize that trust is less about understanding what's happening and more about believing that what's happening is somehow shaping you for what's next. Think about how many times in your life you only understood the purpose of a moment once it had passed. How often did the clarity come after the waiting, the lesson after the loss? That's the rhythm of trust. It asks you to keep walking even when the road doesn't make sense. Because it's not your job to see the entire landscape. It's your job to keep moving forward in faith that the view will reveal itself in time. Trust doesn't demand that you feel brave, it only asks that you remain willing. Some days, that willingness might look like getting out of bed when everything inside you wants to give up. Other days, it might look like letting yourself hope again after disappointment. Trust is not the absence of fear. It's the quiet defiance that moves anyway. You don't wait until you stop doubting to trust, you trust through the doubt. And in that process, your faith stops being theoretical. It becomes lived, embodied, real. The truth is, trust doesn't always change your circumstances immediately, but it changes you within them. It shifts your posture from resistance to receptivity, from anxiety to surrender. And over time, that change within you starts to change what surrounds you. Because when you trust consistently, you align yourself with something far greater than control. You step into the current of grace. And that's when the impossible begins to move in your direction. There is an energy that lives inside everything we do. It's in the way we speak, the way we pray, the way we wait, the way we hope. When that energy is rooted in anxiety, even our faith becomes a performance of fear, as if we are trying to convince life to bless us, to notice us, to hurry up. But when our energy comes from alignment, from peace, from quiet trust, from surrender, everything begins to shift. The same actions, the same prayers, the same waiting take on a different vibration. Because life doesn't respond to panic, it responds to presence. We often try to force timing, to make things happen because we are afraid they never will. We say we trust, but underneath there's a hum of worry, a restlessness that says, what if it doesn't work out? And so we move faster, speak louder, try harder. But that energy, that grasping, that pushing doesn't create progress. It creates resistance. It blocks the very thing we're asking for. Alignment, on the other hand, doesn't come from effort, it comes from stillness. It's what happens when our inner world starts matching what we're praying for outwardly. You can't ask for peace while living in constant tension. You can't ask for love while harboring fear that you're unworthy of it. You can't ask for expansion while clinging to comfort. Alignment means that your energy, your words, your expectations, your attitude, all begin to speak the same language. It's not about pretending to be calm. It's about trusting deeply enough to actually be calm. Because when your inner world is at peace, the outer world begins to reflect that peace back to you. There's a softness that appears when you stop chasing outcomes and start aligning with purpose. You no longer need to manipulate, to control, to prove. You begin to realize that what's meant for you doesn't need to be forced into existence. It finds its way naturally when you're ready to receive it. That readiness doesn't come from exhaustion, it comes from alignment. When you are aligned, you don't move out of desperation, you move out of clarity. You don't beg, you believe. You don't rush, you allow. And maybe that's what it really means to live by faith. Not to constantly push for what you want, but to position yourself for what is already on its way. The universe, God, life, whatever you name it, always meets you at the level of your alignment, not your anxiety. It doesn't respond to your fear, it responds to your faith. So when you stop living from a place of panic and start living from a place of peace, you don't have to chase the impossible anymore. You simply become the kind of person it can find. And that's when what you once thought was out of reach begins to unfold right where you are. We imagine that when something miraculous happens, it will come with thunder, with flashing signs, with undeniable proof that heaven has intervened. We expect the extraordinary to look grand, to announce itself with certainty. But in truth, the miraculous rarely arrives that way. More often, it slips in quietly, disguised as something ordinary, a small shift, a subtle nudge, a gentle unfolding that you almost miss if you're not paying attention. The impossible doesn't always enter your life with spectacle. Sometimes it walks in softly through the back door of your everyday moments. It might be the conversation that changes the direction of your heart, the phone call you didn't expect but somehow needed, the peace that suddenly replaces the fear you've carried for years. It's easy to overlook these moments because they don't fit our picture of what a miracle should look like. But that's the secret. The miraculous doesn't need to look supernatural to be sacred. Sometimes, the very thing you're calling nothing is actually the beginning of everything. We miss so many blessings not because they're absent, but because they're quiet. We keep waiting for life to prove to us that something divine is at work, when all along it's been showing up in whispers. It's in the timing that makes no sense until it does. It's in the people who appear right when you need them. It's in the opportunities that arrive after you've stopped chasing. When you stop doubting long enough to pay attention, you begin to see that the impossible has been weaving itself through your story all along, not as a single event, but as a series of gentle reminders that you are being guided. We want certainty, but life offers subtlety. And maybe that's intentional, because if the miraculous always came in obvious ways, we'd never learn to recognize grace in the small moments. We'd never learn to trust the unseen. The real miracle isn't just in what happens, it's in our ability to notice it. It's in the shift from waiting for something spectacular to realizing that the sacred has been here, quietly shaping our lives in ways we couldn't have planned. Sometimes the miracle is that the storm finally ends. Sometimes it's that you made it through. Sometimes it's that you're still standing, softer, wiser, more open than before. And other times, it's simply that you feel peace where pain once lived. These are not small things. They are the evidence that the impossible doesn't just arrive, it unfolds, slowly, gracefully, without demanding recognition. So don't rush past the quiet moments searching for fireworks. The miraculous doesn't always make noise. It just asks that you be awake enough to see it, humble enough to receive it, and grateful enough to know that it's already here. Because sometimes the miracle isn't something new appearing. It's finally noticing what was there all along. We often think that faith is about getting what we've been waiting for. The answered prayer, the breakthrough, the dream fulfilled. But the deeper truth is that faith is just as much about who you become in the waiting. Because the waiting changes you. It reveals the parts of you that you didn't know were fragile and the parts that you didn't know were strong. It strips away the illusions of control, the noise of impatience, the pride that once made you believe that timing was yours to decide. Waiting is where character is formed, where resilience is born, where faith stops being an idea and becomes something alive within you. You may not see it while you're in it, but every delay carries a lesson. Sometimes it's teaching you patience, other times it's teaching you surrender. Sometimes it's shaping your capacity to hold what you've been asking for. Because the truth is, we're not always ready for the things we pray for. We think we are, but often we still need to grow into the person who can sustain the blessing when it arrives. The waiting is not punishment, it's preparation. It's the space where transformation quietly takes place beneath the surface. It's easy to believe that the miracle is the destination, the moment everything finally works out. But what if the real miracle is that your heart remained open while it didn't? What if the victory is that you kept showing up, loving, trusting, believing, even when there was no evidence that you should? That kind of faith shapes something unshakable within you. It gives you a depth that certainty never could. Because when you've walked through doubt and disappointment and chosen hope anyway, you carry a strength that doesn't depend on outcomes anymore. The waiting also teaches you empathy. It softens you toward others who are still in their own between. You start to recognize that everyone is carrying something unseen, waiting for something they can't yet name. And that realization makes you gentler with them and with yourself. You stop demanding perfection and start valuing presence. You stop striving for control and start cherishing connection. You begin to see that even in your waiting, you're still being led, still being held, still being shaped into someone who can hold more love, more peace, more grace than before. And maybe that's the quiet secret of the impossible. It's never only about what happens outside of you. It's about what awakens inside you in the process. Because once you've met yourself in the silence, once you've learned to trust when there's no proof, once you've seen beauty rise from your own waiting, you can never go back to who you were before. You've changed in a way that cannot be undone. And that change, that strength, that depth, that stillness, that is the miracle.